Good morning everyone and welcome to this new video. Today we will begin, as I had already mentioned to you, the journey of getting to know the world of psychology and all its secrets. So we will try to go and find out what are the most important currents that have made this subject so fascinating and so important, and above all, what are those mechanisms of the mind that accompany us every day in our behaviors, in our living, in our relationships with each other. Meanwhile, psychology is defined as the science of behavior and mental processes through the use of the scientific method, because being considered a real science like all sciences, it is based on the scientific method and thus on a rigorous and objectively valid method. The study of psychology is concerned with so many aspects, the first certainly being cognitive and intrapsychic processes. In parallel, it is also concerned with the study of human behavior, both individual and group, and then with the relationship that human beings have with the environment around them. Literally, psychology means the science of the soul and is derived from philosophy, that very ancient practice of love, of knowledge and research through which people sought to give explanations for man and his existence. This word soul in philosophy, however, as in religion, refers to a meaning more of continuity, space-time between when one is alive and when one dies, so there is this concept of the immortality of the soul. In psychology, on the other hand, when we talk about the soul, we mean the psyche, the mind, and that is that part of the human interiority that is part of each of us, the complex of our desires, our thoughts, both conscious and unconscious. Psychology basically studies these two dimensions of the human mind, that is the cognitive dimension and the affective dimension, basically how man knows things and what he feels in relation to things, what are his emotions, what are his feelings, and what are his behaviors. And here it becomes necessary to make a distinction between the brain and the mind, in that the brain functions through anatomical physiological devices and thus through electrical impulses that pass from one neuronal cell to another, while the mind expresses itself in a totally different way from the brain and cannot be traced back to a totally objective phenomenon such as the manifestations of the brain, but depends on each individual subject, and thus on each individual subject how he reacts to certain external stimuli, for example. Returning to the discussion of the history of psychology, from how it originated precisely from a rib of philosophy until the second half of the 19th century, psychology is regarded precisely as a philosophical reflection on the soul, and from Aristotle onward it was thought that all living beings were endowed with a soul, thus not only humans but also plants and animals. Whereas from Descartes onward things change, because with Descartes we begin to think that only humans are endowed with souls, and we also begin to talk about how human beings are able to connect ideas together through different principles that we will now see. The first principle of linking ideas is that of similarity. For example, if we see a picture, it will definitely take us back to the original image. The second is that of spatiotemporal continuity, that is, when a memory brings to mind other phenomena within a short distance of time. The third is that of randomness. Fire is associated with the idea of heat. So these were all the principles studied by philosophical psychology, but psychology, to become an autonomous science, will have to wait for a specific date, namely 1879, a very important date in which a brilliant German physician and physiologist, Wundt, founded the first laboratory of experimental psychology. So from Wundt onwards, psychology, as I said, will become a real science based, as we said before, on the scientific method and therefore on objectively detectable data, on empirical data based precisely on reality. So in 1879, Wundt founds this laboratory of psychology in Leipzig, of experimental psychology, and the object of study of psychology becomes precisely the immediate experience of reality. What does this mean? Basically, Wundt sets out to study the reactions that particular people have when subjected to stimuli. The first thing Wundt does is not to study thought in its complexity, but to break down the various psychic contents and study them individually. So basically, studying these simple phenomena, not thought in its totality, Wundt did what? He would take a group of people and subject them to a stimulus, which could be either visual or auditory. And then, once the experiment was over, he would invite these people to report the perceptions, sensations, and emotions they experienced in being subjected to this stimulus. Undoubtedly, what Wundt did was a first draft of experimental psychology, but it was very interesting because he could write down all these results and he could see how individually each person reacted differently, perhaps subjected to the same stimulus. Parallel to the birth of this first experimental laboratory in Leipzig, Germany, all over the rest of the world, there was really a lot of excitement going on from a psychological point of view. In every part of the world, really important schools of thought and psychological currents were emerging. In the next videos, we are going to analyze the authors, the people who made these currents so important up to the present day. So for now, I will say goodbye and see you in the next one.